Hello, Red Crosser. This is Steve with the Volunteer Services Department of the American Red Cross here in Northern New England. And I want to welcome you to this presentation of our new volunteer orientation session. You may be a new volunteer, or you might be an existing Red Cross volunteer who's looking to learn more about our mission, what the Red Cross stands for, our various programs that we operate here in Northern New England. So this is going to be a great foundational overview of the Red Cross here in Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire, our Northern New England region. We'll also be showing you a few systems, a few websites that we utilize here at the Red Cross, and in hopes that we can help ease that learning curve into some of those websites, which we know can be steep. As we get started today, the first thing I want to talk about is Microsoft Teams. This is a platform that we use for video conferencing here at the Red Cross. We use it for a lot of our trainings, a lot of virtual meetings. We're obviously collaborating all over those 3 states in Northern New England. And this platform really allows us to do that very easily. Now, if you've used Zoom before, it's a very similar platform. It's sort of like Pepsi and Coke. They're almost the same thing. And so the features that you see here, muting and unmuting, a camera that you can turn on and off, and a chat feature, all of that should be really familiar if you've used any kind of video conferencing platform before. But in an effort to make it even easier, I'm going to break the fourth wall here. I'm going to leave the presentation, and I'm actually going to open Microsoft Teams, which I'm using to record this presentation. So here I am. Hello. And so this is Microsoft Teams, which I have downloaded to my desktop to use for this purpose. You don't have to download it. You can certainly use it on your web browser, and it might look a little different if you do. But the good news is it has many of the same features, including the 3 that were on the slide moments ago, which I'll talk about now. Up here, you see a microphone. This is our mute button. So if there are a lot of our participants on the call, we might ask people to mute themselves so that we can reduce background noise or that we don't hear you over another speaker. So it's really easy to use that mute button. You just click the microphone to toggle it on or off. If you click it, you'll see a slash go through it. That means you're muted and that people cannot hear you. Don't worry, they'll tell you if you're trying to speak. And then you can click it again to unmute yourself, and you can actually, it looks like a microphone here without a slash through it. The video button is very similar. It's a toggle switch. So when it's filled in like this, that means that your video is on, as you can tell. If I click the button, it'll turn my video off, and you'll see the slash go through the video. The microphone would function the same way. If I click on this, it'll turn the video back on. So again, kind of toggling between on and off, very easy to use. If you're using a device like a smartphone or a laptop that has a camera built in, excuse me, it's very easy to turn your camera on if it's a small meeting that's participatory, or if you want to stay out of the way, maybe you're still in your PJs, you can turn your camera off, no offense. Lastly, there's a chat feature here. If I look at this dialog bubble for showing conversation, if I click on that, it'll open up a sidebar here that's a chat bar, and you can see different messages that people have sent in the chat, like the one I sent earlier here. You can also send new messages to folks, communicate with the other presenters or with the other people on the call. It's a nice way to participate, and we'll often ask people to ask questions in the chat during trainings or presentations. All you do is type something like this hello button here, I can put exclamation mark, and I can either hit enter to send it or use this little send arrow down here to send a new message. Don't worry that your name's not attached. Anybody who's receiving the message will see your name there. So don't worry about that. And that's the chat feature. Those are the 3 primary features of Microsoft Teams that we utilize most often, although you're free to explore any of the other buttons that you see up here. Again, if you're using Teams on the web, you might have to jiggle your mouse to get these to show up, and they might be in a toolbar in the middle of your screen as opposed to at the top. Just depends on how you're accessing Microsoft Teams. So I'll go ahead and return to the presentation now. But I did want to share that overview, because even though you're likely to be watching this presentation on YouTube, you will probably use Microsoft Teams at some point during your Red Cross service, whether it's a meeting with your department, a training that the region is holding, an open house, or an all-staff meeting. We use Microsoft Teams a lot, so it's great to have at least a little familiarity with it. Taking a look at our agenda today, here are the things we're going to talk about. We'll do a quick overview of the American Red Cross as a whole, talk about the organization nationwide. And then we'll talk about our Northern New England region, which is kind of our subsection of the American Red Cross. The whole country is divided into a whole bunch of different regions, and ours happens to be Northern New England up here in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. We'll take a quick break. We'll need a breather. I'll at least exhale. There's a lot of information loaded into that first and second session there. And then we'll take a look at a couple of volunteer websites that we use at the Red Cross. And so they're both really important sites. We'll take a look at them together. We'll actually do a little show and tell. I'll break the fourth wall again. We'll go to those sites together and I'll give you a little tour. So that's more or less what we're going to be doing for today's agenda. But first, let's talk about other ways that you can access some orientation materials. So again, you're watching this recording likely on YouTube. But we do host these sessions as facilitator-led sessions. We host them live and pretty regularly. So if you'd like to attend one of these sessions in person, you are certainly welcome to. You can ask questions of a facilitator like myself and interact with other volunteers who might be new as well. I'll show you where to find those upcoming sessions shortly later on as we talk about Volunteer Connection, which is a really important website. You'll also notice there's two other kinds of orientation that you could perform if you so choose. They're both optional. One is the My Red Cross orientation. This is a presentation put together by the American Red Cross's national headquarters. It's about 45 minutes long, and it's a presentation like this one that you can learn a little bit more. They dive a little deeper into history of the Red Cross, and they go into some program overviews of some national programs that we operate here in the region as well. So the information is pretty similar. We think it might be a little dry for our taste, so hence we're giving you something that's more localized. But it's your choice. You're certainly welcome to access that, and I'll show you how to find it. Likewise, we have some regional orientation materials that are actually posted online. So if you enjoy the video session and you want to learn more, do a little reading and supplement this, what we include in the video is not everything that's in the regional orientation. So you're welcome to check out those. They're written materials and they are posted in Volunteer Connection under the My Chapter tab, which will make more sense when we visit the site later on. So anyway, there are more resources for you for orientation. If you watch this video and you'd still feel like there's something missing or that you don't understand certain elements, you can find more information always available to you, primarily in Volunteer Connection, which again, we'll talk about. So let's talk about the American Red Cross as a whole, and we'll start with the values that drive the Red Cross. In 2021, the Red Cross is celebrating its 140th anniversary. So we're a very well-established nonprofit, one of the oldest in the United States that continues to operate. And we have a pretty recognized brand, and we stand for things that should be pretty familiar to you, even if you are new to the Red Cross. Things like humanity, impartiality, independence, unity, and universality. The Red Cross is all over the world. These are the 7 fundamental principles of the Red Cross. This is what the Red Cross stands for as an organization, and not just here in the United States, but also universally around the world. So these are the values that shape the organization as a whole. These 5 values here at the bottom, we call these the 5 C's. And these are the behaviors that shape us as individuals, as what we call Red Crossers. So these values: compassion, creativity, credibility, collaboration, and commitment. The 5 C's, you'll hear that referred to from time to time. And this is what we hope to represent as individuals working as representatives of the Red Cross. Now, the values tie really nicely into the Red Cross's mission, which is what the Red Cross aims to accomplish, what we stand for, and what we're trying to do. I won't read to you very much today, but I do want to read the mission verbatim, and that is that the American Red Cross prevents and alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. Again, this probably tracks with what you know about the Red Cross and with some of the programs that you might be familiar with, which we'll talk about shortly. And the programs are also represented in our vision, which is what we're trying to accomplish, what we hope, what the world will look like if the Red Cross succeeds. So here's the vision, which I'll also read. We aspire to turn compassion into action so that all people affected by disaster across the country and around the world receive care, shelter, and hope. Our communities are ready and prepared for disasters. Everyone in our country has access to safe, life-saving blood and blood products. That all members of our armed forces and their families find support and comfort whenever needed. And finally, in an emergency, there are always trained individuals nearby, ready to use their Red Cross skills to save lives. So the vision statement of the Red Cross really encapsulates most of the programs that you're probably familiar with, meaning disaster, blood, and our trained services, which we call training services, like CPR, first aid, lifeguarding, those kind of things. And there's also a lesser known program here, Armed Service to the Armed Forces, represented by the fourth bullet. So in any case, that actually transitions really nicely into the major programs and services of the Red Cross. So what people are most familiar with, like I said, is probably blood services. We're always doing blood drives in communities all over the country. And so that's a major operation of the Red Cross. We can't manufacture blood. We just haven't figured that out yet. The science isn't there. So the only way that blood is supplied to people who need it is through donations. So the Red Cross is deeply involved in providing for a safe blood supply nationwide here in the US. Disaster Cycle Services, also a very well-known program, largely because of the publicity that large-scale disasters get in our country, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, those kind of things. You'll always see the Red Cross slapped all over television when those things happen. On a smaller scale, we're also responding to house fires all over the country. That's actually the most common type of disaster that the Red Cross assists with. So you may know somebody who's been affected by a house fire, perhaps you even, and the Red Cross would be available as a service provider to those individuals and families. I mentioned Service to the Armed Forces, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. It's a really interesting program, and again, a bit lesser known, but we do provide services to active military as well as veterans and their families. And again, we'll talk about that at length a little later. Likewise, with international services, a lesser known service, but something I'm happy to share with you as we go through the presentation. And finally, training services. This is the only slide where we'll talk about training services, primarily because that program doesn't utilize volunteers. There's only paid staff who are engaging in training services programs, and that again is providing CPR training, first aid training, lifeguarding. We even do some babysitting classes. I mean, there's just loads of classes out there and certifications that you can get through the Red Cross. Again, that's through our training services program, which is a really important part of what the Red Cross does, and something that you're probably familiar with. I mean, lots of people get first aid and CPR certified through the Red Cross. As a volunteer, you can too. We'll talk about that later on as well. So that's the Red Cross in a nutshell. Let's dive in and talk about our region and what it looks like. I mentioned earlier it's Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So here's a handy map. And this is the region as a whole. The different colors represent different chapters, which might be a term that you're more familiar with than a regional. So Vermont is its own chapter, New Hampshire is its own chapter, and then you can see Maine is divided into 3 different chapters that are different in size, but more closely related in population. And you'll see that that's northern and eastern Maine, the big one in green, central and mid coast, and then finally southern Maine, the smallish purple section there in southern Maine, where a lot of our population in Maine is. You can see the red crosses on the map represent the chapter headquarters for the various chapters. So we have offices in Burlington, Vermont, Concord, New Hampshire, Portland, Maine for southern Maine, Topsham, Maine, and also Bangor up in northern and eastern Maine. So those are our chapter headquarters. We've got a few other offices scattered around the region, but primarily this is kind of us as a governing body. You know, we have a lot of departments that work on a regional level, including volunteer services, which I'm a part of. And so we're servicing people and meeting needs with those programs in this geographic area here in northern New England. So let's talk about some of those programs and what they do at the regional level. The first one I'll start with is biomedical services, also called blood services. So those terms are kind of interchangeable here in the region. You'll notice here, so the Red Cross collects and provides about 40% of the nation's blood supply. That makes us the largest provider of blood in the country. So we are the single largest provider, even though we don't provide a majority necessarily. 40%, still a ton. So you'll see Red Cross blood drives popping up in communities all over the country, including all over northern New England. We do have a few donation centers. Sometimes we call those fixed sites, where we're collecting blood generally 7 days a week. And you can see the cities that are listed there where those donation centers are. They tend to be population centers, and that's certainly no different here in northern New England. But community blood drives, like I said, happen almost everywhere. We have blood mobiles that take drives mobile. We've got a whole bunch of staff and volunteers who pop up in all communities to host and facilitate blood drives. Shocking statistic, you can see there, on average, someone in the US needs blood every 2 seconds, which is really remarkable. Obviously, trauma, emergencies, accidents, those kind of things, but also cancer treatment. And that's a huge use for blood. There's a lot of transfusions that go during chemotherapy. And you can see that a single blood donation can save up to 5 lives. That's because we manufacture whole blood donations. When you give whole blood, we can actually pull out things like plasma or platelets. You can also donate those things individually if you just want to donate plasma, for example. So you can save multiple lives with a blood donation. It's a really great service. And we have volunteers engaged in this program in a number of ways. Primarily, it's the blood donor ambassador role, which is a customer service role at blood drives, helping to bring donors in, make sure that they are registered for their appointment, get all their paperwork in order, hand them over to the medical staff, and then we check in on them after they've given blood to make sure they're feeling well and that they have everything they need. You get to give people juice and cookies, just like you see on TV. That's the blood donor ambassador role, and we have loads of volunteers who help in that way. The next major program that people are often quite familiar with is disaster cycle services. Again, this is our disaster programming. You can see there we respond to 70,000 disasters every year, which is 1 disaster every 8 minutes. I mentioned earlier, most of those are home fires, whether they're single family or multifamily, excuse me. And the big stuff, the big disasters like wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes, all of that tends to happen from late summer through early winter. We call that disaster season, kind of colloquially. It's called disaster cycle services because it really is a cycle. You're either preparing for disasters, responding to disasters, or recovering from disasters. And no matter where your community is, you're in one part of that cycle. So that's where that disaster cycle services comes from. And of course, the aim of disaster cycle services is providing immediate relief to victims of disaster. Obviously, the shelter, like what you see pictured here, obviously when a lot of people are displaced by a hurricane or a flood, we do pop open disaster shelters. But even for families affected by home fires, we can support them with financial resources that allows them to stay in hotels, get food, clothes for work that they might have lost if they're continuing to work in the aftermath of a disaster. And then obviously, healthcare supplies, things like medications or prosthetics, any kind of healthcare needs that you might need met, as well as mental health. We have volunteers who are mental health professionals who assist people through the trauma of that loss, whether it's a fatal fire or a fatal disaster, perhaps you lost a pet, or just losing all of your possessions, losing your home. It's a very traumatic experience. And we have Red Cross volunteers who assist with all avenues of recovery in disaster. Those who respond locally to disasters are called disaster action team members. These are the folks who are getting the calls, in the middle of the night when there's a fire in their community and to see if they're available to go and help the affected families. And that network expands all over the United States. So no matter where you live, heaven forbid, if anything happened to your home tomorrow, the Red Cross would be there. You would have local volunteers coming to assist and asking what we could do for you and what your needs are. So it's nice to know that blanket is in place for all of us. Now, again, the lesser known programs, there's 2 of them I want to talk about on this slide. The first is service to the armed forces. The Red Cross is an organization. We have a really unique role and a unique relationship to the U.S. government. We are not a government agency, but we are chartered by Congress. So Congress mandates that we do exist, and there are a few things that Congress mandates that we do, even though they don't provide any funding. So we get no government funding. We're not an arm of the government, but we do have a mandate from the U.S. government to exist and to facilitate certain services. One of those is service to the armed forces. And specifically, it's a messaging service that we provide to deployed service members to help keep them connected to their family members back home. And it's a really key and important role. If there's a something happens back home, like let's say someone's father gets really ill and they're deployed overseas, that family can communicate with the Red Cross to try and let their service person know that there's been an incident with their family or something is happening back home that they need to know about. We will communicate that through our network to their field officer, who can then decide whether or not they can tell the soldier and whether or not accommodations can be made to arrange for that soldier to travel home, depending on the circumstances. So we are the messengers. We communicate between families and deployed service members. It's a really great program and a really interesting one that not a lot of people know about. We also have tons of veterans programs, particularly as people are coming home immediately after their tours. We can help them reintegrate into life here in the United States and reintegrate back into their families whose dynamics might have changed while they were deployed or overseas. And so veterans programs are obviously a big part of what we do as well. And we do brief enlistees and families before they deploy to let them know that we're here and that if something should happen, they can contact us and the kind of services that we provide. So that's service to the armed forces. International services, also represented on this slide. This is where we can leverage our position as a global power, as the American Red Cross network of national societies. You can see there's almost 190 of them. That's most countries in the world have a Red Cross or Red Crescent society. And if, for example, we have refugees who make it to the United States but have lost touch with family members during conflicts or disasters that have caused them to become refugees, we can try to use our global network to reconnect them with family members back home, let people know that they're safe, find out what happened to different members of their families or different loved ones. And we call that program Restoring Family Links. So you can see that that's something that our international services team does on the regular with refugees and asylees here in northern New England. One other service that's really cool, we call it Missing Maps. And this is a program where we look at satellite imagery of remote communities around the world and try and identify human settlements so that as global disasters happen elsewhere in the world, Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in that country can respond to local needs, whether, again, it's a man-made disaster like war and conflict or a natural disaster, perhaps something caused by climate change. We can go into those communities internationally because we know that they exist. Otherwise, if they're not on the maps, the Red Cross can't respond. We don't know how to help. So it's all about identifying where settlements are and where people are in the event of a tragedy where people might need help. So both really amazing programs, and again, lesser known to most people in the United States. Now, my pictures have gone from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. That's not a coincidence. That's because we're transitioning from the departments that are kind of service-oriented and outward-facing, working directly with clients, to some of the internal departments that actually help the Red Cross continue to operate. And obviously, the first one we can talk about is business operations. Operations, as it's often called, handles our fleet, our facilities, and all of our equipment and administration. So these are the folks taking care of our offices, helping us with mass mailings, doing all kinds of coordinating for the vehicles, and any kind of equipment that needs to take place as well. We do have about 100 vehicles across the region. Some of those are blood vehicles, like the blood mobiles we talked about. Some of those, like you see here, these are emergency response vehicles, also called ERVs. These are mobile disaster units that actually can prep and distribute food or other supplies. You'll often see these in the event of a national disaster. ERVs from all over the country make road trips to the local sites to shuttle supplies around and so on. So you'll see our vehicles elsewhere in the country should large events occur. But in any case, so we have operations, that's the kind of roles that they perform. And of course, we have volunteers operating in our operations department as well. Whether it's helping with administration and mailings to maintaining some of those vehicles, changing wiper blades and headlights and making sure the registration and inspections are performed. There's just all kinds of roles, especially if you're a tinkerer or handy with your hands, or you want to work in an office environment. Check out our operations team. They're all great people. And they really help the whole organization. None of the other programs can happen if we don't have this kind of behind the scenes work happening every day. Speaking of behind the scenes work, we have 3 departments here. So I'm getting greedy, but we've got a lot of information here. So the 3 that I'm going to cover: development, communications, and chapter board and leadership. Again, these are 3 different departments. Development is another word for fundraising. So that's where all the money comes from to help run these programs. And the money of the Red Cross is primarily through grants and private donations. Again, we don't get any government funding directly from the U.S. government. So that's something that's worth mentioning. We've got to fund the mission in other ways. And that's what development and fundraising do. We do have volunteers who operate in that space as well, whether it's helping with events or writing grants, any kind of particular skills that people have in that area. Communication is very similar. It's all about messaging, getting our voice out there, getting our stories out there, letting people know what the Red Cross is doing and how we're providing value to people who need it and providing help to people who need it. So we tell our story in every way imaginable, whether it's social media, local print media, or local television media. We have some great partnerships throughout Northern New England. And so hopefully you're seeing stories about the Red Cross. Who knows, maybe that's how you became a volunteer, was one of our outreaches through communications. And finally, we are a nonprofit, so we are guided by chapter and board leadership. We have a board of directors. In fact, we have a board for each chapter. And so, again, it's all local leaders with great contacts and great partnerships that they can connect us to try and get our name out there, try and get our recognition out there, and also help us find clients, find people who need our programs and services. That's just kind of our governance structure, and we certainly have board members throughout the region. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one last department, and that is my own. So this is volunteer services. We have about 2,000 volunteers across those 3 states, and our volunteer services department is trying to provide the absolute best volunteer experience that we can for all of those volunteers, no matter what program they're engaged in or what line of service or line of business that they're helping. All of the departments that we have looked at today, our department supports volunteers in all of those areas. So again, we have a recruitment team that's always bringing in new volunteers and kind of shaking the bushes and finding new people who want to get involved. And our engagement specialists, and that's what I am, we handle all other elements of a volunteer's experience. Everything from intake and orientation, like what we're doing here, recognition and appreciation, help with our systems. We have youth programs. I mean, there's just all kinds of functions that we operate in volunteer services. So if you would like to help other volunteers have a great experience, make sure that they're well taken care of, they're feeling engaged and connected to the Red Cross, and that they're getting out of their volunteerism what they hope to. That's really what we try and do. We are relationship builders between the Red Cross and our volunteers. All right. One last slide before we take a quick break, and that is some of the awards and perks that our volunteer services helps provide. I mentioned recognition and appreciation. This is all part of that. So one of the things we were doing, we typically do, is have events and trainings that we pop up throughout the region. So this picture was taken, 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. We had a volunteer outing to the Ben & Jerry's ice cream factory over in Vermont. We also do sports games. We have all kinds of minor league sports that pop up, hockey games and baseball games. We go to breweries or picnics or wineries. There's all kinds of stuff we do, and ice skating one winter. So we get our volunteers together. We'd love to see you and get together in person when we can, and allow for these kind of events and trainings to pop up. And those are advertised pretty heavily, so you'll see those opportunities as they arise. As far as awards go, there's a number of awards that we issue primarily based on length of service, the amount of time that you've spent as a Red Cross volunteer, and also the number of hours that you're recording as a volunteer. So you'll see the service pins there, the 5 years, 10 years, and 25 years are pictured. And we celebrate those. We send those pins to our volunteers when they eclipse those milestones. The first one comes at just 1 year. So you'll get a 1-year recognition pin if you stick around that long. And we certainly hope that you will. And then it's every 5 years after that, as you can see by these pins here. The Volunteer Service Award that you see up above it is an award issued by the federal government to anyone in the United States who volunteers a certain number of hours within a calendar year. So there's a bronze, silver, and gold level of those awards. You'll get a certificate signed by the president, as well as one of those fancy eagle pins that you see pictured there. The bronze pin starts at 100 hours, silver is 250, and gold is 500. And believe it or not, we have scores of volunteers who meet all of those hours levels every year. So we're just thrilled that that's the case, and hope that you can become one of those volunteers. It's all about recording your hours in Volunteer Connection, which we'll talk about a little later. But if you do, we are more than happy to honor you with those awards. Lastly, you'll see the Red Cross brand all over lots of things: water bottles, hats, and T-shirts, and mouse pads, and selfie sticks, and all kinds of stuff that we send people. And so these may pop up in the mail for you from your department, from our volunteer services team. We like to allow people to represent the brand. We hope that you have pride in being a Red Cross volunteer and in taking part in the mission in this way. And we hope that you'll represent us well in the community as well. So we're glad to outfit you with some goodies that help you promote the Red Cross as a whole and recognize your own contributions to the mission. One thing that's not pictured on this slide that I want to mention is the CPR and first aid training that I dropped a hint about earlier. If you work as a volunteer, you submit 25 hours of service to the Red Cross. Our volunteer services team can send you a coupon code so that you can get CPR and first aid classes in your community. You can get registered and certified for those skills absolutely free of cost. It's about $100 value. So it's a huge perk to being a Red Cross volunteer that you can get that training for free so that you are prepared to save lives in your own community and save your loved ones if necessary. But again, first aid and CPR, once you eclipse the 25-hour mark, you're encouraged to reach out to our volunteer services team, and we will gladly send you a coupon code so that you can find a time for a class near you and that works for your schedule. And they're offered all the time by our training services department. So hopefully you'll be able to find something close by, or at least at a time where you're willing to travel and go and take advantage of that resource. So again, that's the 25-hour mark. That is covered more in depth in our written orientation materials, which we'll look at when we go to Volunteer Connection. And this is that break I promised. So I'm going to take 30 seconds and take a big drink of water. You can do the same because this has been a lot of information. So if you want to pause the video and come back momentarily, I would encourage you to stretch your legs, get an apple, use the restroom if you need to. Just take a quick break because we've covered a lot of ground and I don't want to overwhelm you back to back. So I'm going to take a quick drink. You can pause the video and we'll come right back. Okay, so you'll see here there's a room for question and answer during our facilitator-led sessions, which we host virtually but live. This is an opportunity for people to start asking some of the questions they might have about the services we've covered, some of the perks, anything that we've covered so far, the region, the geography, the difference between the chapters, which are a subset of the region. All kinds of questions pop up during this Q&A. If you've got loads of them, you are welcome to attend any of those facilitator-led sessions that are upcoming. Again, we do host these regularly, so you can always attend one of those and ask your questions. Or you can reach out to our volunteer services team. We'll have our contact information popped up on the slides in a little while. Actually, I believe we have it on the very next slide after here, but as a reminder, this is where we are in the presentation. We have our organizational overview kind of taken care of. We've talked about our region and all of the departments and the different roles that people perform in our region. We've taken our little break, and now we are moving on to volunteer systems. These are the websites that we use as Red Cross volunteers. They are very, very helpful and kind of a necessary part of your volunteer service and your relationship with the Red Cross. But first, I want to talk a little bit about some volunteer resources. Our volunteer services team, we call ourselves the HR shop for volunteers, which means that we do provide some resources to volunteers in case you want to give us some feedback about your experience. That's what we're here to try and learn about and also improve. So we do 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day check-ins with our new volunteers. We'll send you a link to a survey. We might give you a phone call or shoot you a text. Just asking about your experience, making sure that all is well, that you're connected to your supervisor, you understand what your job is, that you are having a good onboarding experience early on in your volunteer tenure. Every year, we send you a volunteer satisfaction survey through Volunteer Connection, and you can check that out annually after your 90-day anniversary. And then if something isn't right, there are a couple of resources that you have here. You can pause the video if you want to take a look at these in greater detail, but first and foremost, reaching out to your direct supervisor or our volunteer services team is really the best way to resolve any kind of conflicts. But if there's a conflict of interest or something that you identify, if you see some fraud and you want to report that, there's all kinds of resources. The Office of the Ombudsman can give you advice or guidance as a neutral third party about any kind of workplace disputes or conflicts. We do have a whistleblower hotline that you're welcome to use. That's called the Concerned Connection line. Say that 10 times fast. But the number is there. And then, of course, our Red Cross, we're dealing with tragedy and trauma and disaster and all kinds of really hard things mental health wise. So we have a staff support hotline that's open to both paid staff and volunteer staff. And you are welcome to call that line. It's staffed by professionals who are also often volunteering for the Red Cross, but licensed. And so that's a resource that's available as well. Our volunteer services team, we have an email address that you can contact. And again, it's posted there. It's volunteer.NNE, which stands for Northern New England, @redcross.org. And if you're ever in doubt, you have issues or questions that you want to talk about, please just email us. We are more than happy to work with you. That is our job, is to try and make things good, make sure things are going well for you, and make things better if they're not. So we're available and open. Please do feel free to contact us. Let's talk a little bit about Red Cross culture as we dive into the websites. I want to kind of explain why we use them and why it's important. So again, as I mentioned at the very beginning when I showed you Microsoft Teams, we are always collaborating, whether it's on various programs across the region, a specific project we're working on, an event we're hosting. We're doing a lot of that collaborating remotely, and often we're using Microsoft Teams. That's why I wanted to take the time to actually show you the platform, because it is likely to be some part of your Red Cross service. Likewise, email is really important to the Red Cross. It's our primary channel for communication. So you'll get emails from your supervisors, from our volunteer services team, from other volunteers. Direct supervisors use this differently, but most of them are using email to manage their teams. So be prepared if you haven't already gotten a boatload of emails from the Red Cross. You will get them with relative frequency. And we try to only send you information that is important. But you will get a lot of information from the Red Cross. And again, email is an important platform for that. Part and parcel to all of this online talk, we do confidentiality and web security trainings twice a year. And those trainings are hosted on our online training platform, which is called Edge. We'll take a trip there together shortly. But we do those semi-annually. They're required by Red Cross National, so it's nothing we can get you out of here regionally. But it's a helpful way for us to protect each other's information, especially as we're collaborating and communicating online. We just want to be really safe and keep things confidential. And that's what those trainings are all about. So that'll be part of your service. And again, we'll talk about where to find those in Edge as we visit that website momentarily. Lastly, all of this is to say that technology is a really important tool for scale. That the impact that the Red Cross makes both regionally and nationwide is tremendous. We're huge. And so in order to build that scale and maintain it, the ability to serve literally every citizen of the United States with disaster coverage, for example, we have to use technology to make that happen. So even in a local role, you're part of this big network of 2,000 volunteers. We're covering 55,000 square miles, and we have got to use computer systems to manage those records. And that requires you as a volunteer to participate in those systems. Hopefully it's easy to see why. We just want to be able to keep track of what people are doing for us, the kind of programs that we're running, and what our impact is on our communities. So that's all the reasons that we're using technology. And here are the sites that we will use. The most important one is called Volunteer Connection. This is a website that's available exclusively to Red Crossers. It's a database for our volunteers. You can also interact with it in a number of ways. This is where you'll record your volunteer hours, for example, in pursuit of those awards, and also to help us recognize you for all of the contributions that you're making to the mission. It also helps the Red Cross compete for funding. When you log your volunteer hours, oftentimes we're submitting grants about the effectiveness of our program, about our ability to galvanize communities and really, leverage the power of volunteers to accomplish the mission. You guys are the muscle, but if you don't record it, then we don't know what you're doing. We can't kind of capture that impact. So recording your volunteer hours, super important, also really easy. And I promise I'll show you exactly how to do it. It's very simple and quick. Should take, less than 5 minutes to record hours for a week or more. So it's a very easy thing to do after your shifts or after events. A great case in point. After you finish this video, why not record your volunteer hours for it? Your orientation is absolutely volunteering. You are learning about the organization and getting more comfortable with your role and understanding of what you are, what your role is as a volunteer. So that's volunteer hours. I'll show you how to record those shortly. You can also sign up for upcoming shifts, local events, training sessions. I'll show you how to do that as well. Access our other Red Cross platforms. The big one is Edge. That's our training platform where those web security trainings are. And of course, if you're in a program like Disaster Cycle Services, you will be very familiar with Edge. It's very training heavy, some of those roles. You can certainly update your contact info if you have a different email address or a profile, if you move or relocate, any of those things. And you can apply for additional positions. We're going to go to Volunteer Connection here in just a minute, and I'll show you how to do all of these things. We'll take a quick tour, but we also have a video tour in our regional orientation materials, which live on Volunteer Connection, those print materials that I spoke about at the very beginning of this video. You can find those in Volunteer Connection. We are happy to guide you to those, and you can take the guided tour as well. It's about a 7-minute video. We look over each section of the site. The only other platform we're going to talk about is Edge. And again, this is our online training platform. It's got loads of training videos and modules and classes. Many of them are built by Red Cross National and then distributed exclusively to our network of volunteers. And what do you do there? This is where you'll take any online trainings that you need to take. In fact, in the screenshot here, under the My Training, you can see one of those data privacy and information security awareness trainings. So that's a great example of those web confidentiality trainings that everyone is required to take. Certainly some roles will utilize Edge more than others. Disaster Cycle Services, like I said, they are all about Edge trainings. There's just lots of trainings that you need to take in order to operate in DCS. Some other programs may not utilize it quite as much. They might be sending emails with packets and those kind of things instead. But it's important to know Edge, if only to take those required classes annually, but you may end up using it quite a bit more for other purposes. And you're also encouraged to explore it, right? Just because a training isn't required for you doesn't mean you can't take one. If you want to learn more about disaster cycle services, maybe you work in blood services, but you'd like to learn more about responding locally and what that might look like, you can go on Edge and find all the trainings. Many of them do not have prerequisites. You can just go ahead and launch them at your convenience. So it's a really great platform to learn more about the Red Cross, kind of dip your toe in the water in different roles and responsibilities and see what might be for you. Anyway, we'll take a look at Edge. We'll go there together. In fact, we'll do that right now. So I'm going to break the fourth wall here. I'll come back to you so you can see my screen here. And I'm going to go to this internet browser tab here. This is Volunteer Connection. And the way that I access this is by going to volunteerconnection.redcross.org. That was listed on the slide previously, so hopefully you can pause that. I recommend you bookmark it. You will use Volunteer Connection quite a bit, if only to log your hours, but likely for other reasons as well. So again, volunteerconnection.redcross.org will take you directly to Volunteer Connection. This is the home page. This is what you'll see as you log in to Volunteer Connection. And let's take a quick tour. I'll just show you a couple of things. I won't go into great detail. You can watch the video in our orientation materials for that. But I do want to at least gloss over a couple of really important resources. The first would be the orientation materials. Where do you find the print materials if you want more information about anything that you've seen today, or even more than that? If you go to this My Chapter tab and look at the very bottom here, you'll see it in bright red letters, the Northern New England Volunteer Orientation. And if you navigate to this page, it opens up a series of pages that you scroll through left and right. You can click the next and previous arrows to advance to different topics. You can see that the topics are pretty similar from what we've been covering already, but with some additional information as well. If you look at volunteer resources, there's a page on Volunteer Connection. That's where you can take that tour of the homepage at length. There's some stuff for Edge, for Microsoft Teams. Those HR links that I provided are here. And then there's an overview of our chapters and regions, the awards and other perks. That's where you can learn more about first aid and CPR certifications. So all of those materials are under the My Chapter tab, which is on the Volunteer Connection homepage. Just log into Volunteer Connection here and then go to My Chapter and select the orientation. You can navigate that at any time. It's always available, so feel free to check it out. One other thing I want to mention, under the My Shifts tab, we have something called a Regional Events and Trainings Calendar. And this, if I click on it, will open up a calendar with all kinds of trainings and events that are coming up in the region. These tend to be locally produced events, so these are things that we are hosting that we think might be of interest to you. Some of them may be, some of them maybe not. It's completely up to you what you want to sign up for. But all you do is click on the event itself. It will open up a description of the event. And you can scroll down to the bottom here and register for anything that tickles your fancy. This, for example, is one of our facilitator-led new volunteer orientation sessions. So if you were available this day, you wanted to take this in person, you can scroll down and register for it. Go back to the calendar here, but you can see all kinds of other events here, some of them social, some of them training oriented. But if it's on this calendar, here's what's most important. You are welcome to attend. If it's on the calendar, you are invited. So please feel free to check this out. We're posting new events all the time. It's a really great way to stay involved with the Red Cross and to find out what's going on locally in the region. Again, you access that. You can go to the home page. If you go to the My Shifts tab here on the home page, it's the one in red, Regional Events and Trainings Calendar. And that will open that up and allow you to find some things to engage in. Where you will log your hours is right here in the middle of the page. You can see the Enter Hours feature here and a big red Add Hours button. We try and make it nice and easy for you. If you click that Add Hours, you'll see a pop-up come up where you can include the date, the number of hours you worked, the number of minutes in 15-minute increments, what the activity was, whatever it was you were doing, whether it was attending a meeting or a training or a blood drive, whatever it might be. You can select the hours type, which is almost always worked. Your supervisor, your direct supervisor, can clarify what the other ones mean if it's something that you all use in your department. But by and large, most volunteer hours are worked volunteer hours. And then your position. If you have more than one, you'll see those pop up here. But what position, what role were you fulfilling when you completed those hours? We do have volunteers who work in multiple departments. They have multiple roles with the Red Cross, so it's nice for them to be able to attribute their hours correctly. And then you just click the Submit button, and that will log hours for you. Again, there's boatloads of reasons to do this, both personally, as a volunteer, help us recognize you, earn awards, make sure that you are documenting your own service if you need those hours for work or for school. But beyond that, like I said, it makes a bigger impact in the region to help us know how good a job we're doing at engaging our volunteers, giving them opportunities to participate, finding meaningful roles for them to engage in, and also, kind of the broader impact of the Red Cross in our communities. It's just really great to log your hours, and we hope that you'll do that after watching this video. Again, it's on the Volunteer Connection homepage. Just scroll down to the middle of the page and click that big Add Hours button. So anyway, that's kind of the basics of Volunteer Connection. There's a number of other tabs you can check out and other resources available to you. But primarily, if you watch the video and the orientation materials, you can find out more. Lastly, the only other thing I want to mention, we talked about EDGE, right? And how to access EDGE, which is the training platform for the Red Cross. If you click on this EDGE button right below your profile picture, that will take you directly to EDGE and the Red Cross's internal training system. If I click it here, I won't actually be able to access it through this volunteer, but if I go to it my way, here we go. I'll show you what EDGE looks like. For you, again, just click right under that profile picture. You'll see an EDGE button. If you click there, it should work just fine. And this is what should load. So this is the homepage for American Red Cross's EDGE platform. You can look for trainings. You can search for a name of a training if a supervisor has recommended one to you. You can search for it here. You can also browse through the training catalog and archives. We can take a look at that together, actually. And you can look for a training that might be of interest to you. Again, on our example earlier, let's say you are interested in, you're working in blood and you're interested in learning more about disaster cycle services. If I type in disaster cycle services, aha, here's disaster cycle services, an overview. Sounds about right, right? It's an hour-long presentation that goes over all of the disaster cycle services program. And here it says request. If you click on the arrow, you can actually launch it. This is something you can launch at any time. So if you're interested in learning more about DCS, I believe it's a required class for our disaster cycle services volunteers. But even if you're not a DCS volunteer, you are welcome to take this. You can go to Edge and find it and explore on your own. All of the classes that you have taken in Edge are added to your transcript. So if I go back to the Edge homepage, you can see my transcript here, and you can see a history of the classes that you've taken there. And any trainings that your supervisor has assigned to you will be right here on the homepage under this My Training tab. You'll see a list of the trainings that have been assigned to you. Some of them might have due dates, but you can launch those directly from here if you'd like, or click on the title of the training to learn more about it before you launch it. So it's very easy to use. It's a pretty simple interface. And again, you access it directly from Volunteer Connection, which is volunteerconnection.redcross.org. Then look for that Edge verbiage right below your profile picture, and that will take you directly to Edge. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the presentation now and go back to share. And let's do a little pop quiz, right? Learning is fun. So where do you record your volunteer hours? Hopefully you guys can recall that because we just took a look at it. And again, so A is going to be number 4, volunteerconnection.redcross.org. Where to take your online trainings. Hopefully this is something that we just talked about. So hopefully that rings a bell. And that should be number 1, which is Edge. Our 5 major programs, the 5 programs that we operate in the American Red Cross, hopefully that's a pretty obvious one too. None of these are designed to trick you. So C is number 3, lists out our 5 major programs. The HR department for Red Cross volunteers. Boy, I hope you remember that. That's me. So that's volunteer services. That is bullet number 2 there is for letter D. And lastly, E, where to find and register for cool upcoming regional events. Those are the things that we are hosting, whether it's trainings or social events or volunteer orientation sessions. You also find those on Volunteer Connection. So hopefully none of that is it's too far out there. Hopefully that's something that you can remember. It's primarily those 2 sites, Edge and Volunteer Connection. And Volunteer Connection is where you'll do most things. And that, my friends, is just about it. Congratulations. Welcome to the Red Cross of Northern New England. Again, if you have any questions whatsoever about your experience as a volunteer, about how to access something, maybe you can't get into a system, you can't get a hold of your supervisor, you don't know who your supervisor is, these are the questions that we exist to help you answer. So you are more than welcome to email us at volunteernne@redcross.org. And our volunteer services team will be glad to get back to you as quickly as we can and try and help you through any kind of troubleshooting you might have. Any feedback you have is always welcome, whether on this presentation or about your volunteer service as a whole. Thank you so much for joining us for this online recorded session. I'll come back to you so I can say goodbye in person here. It's been great spending a little bit of time with you. I hope you feel more comfortable, more confident, and have a better understanding of what the Red Cross is and your role as a Red Cross volunteer. Please do feel free to reach out to our volunteer services team if you have any follow-up questions, and look for these facilitator-led sessions or on Volunteer Connection if you'd like a more thorough orientation than what we've done together. You can find those either in written materials or by attending one of the facilitator-led sessions that you saw on the regional events and trainings calendar. So thanks again for your time. Greatly appreciated. Congratulations on becoming a Red Cross volunteer, and thank you for your service.